Thank you all for coming out. Welcome to the symposium on Thespis, sponsored by New England Gilbert and Sullivan Society. I'm Jacqueline Haney, I'm the program chair. Our other board member in attendance is Brad Amidon, our treasurer. Most of the rest of us are in shows this afternoon.
Yes, I'm David DeVries. I'm the editor of the Trumpet Parade. Just so you know what this guy does with kneecaps. And today our symposium on Thespis, we're going to begin with Professor Jonathan Strong. He's a resident of Rockport, Mass. And Somers in Vermont. He recently retired from Tufts University, where he taught fiction writing. He's also taught at Harvard University, UMass Boston, and Wellesley College. He's received the Rosenthal Award of the National Institute of Arts and Letters, 2 O. Henry Awards, and 2 grants from the National Endowment for the Arts. He's published 16 novels and is the arranger of Sullivan scores for 3 Gilbert libretti whose original music is lost. The Royal Vic in Watertown, Mass. Premiered his Happy Arcadia, and St. John's School his Gentleman in Black. In Illinois in 1963, Professor Strong, just out of high school, directed and conducted the first Midwest production of The Grand Duke with a cast of other recent high schoolers. And he thought this was, what fun. In 1989, the Connecticut Gilbert and Sullivan Society first produced Thespis, with John Dreslin's orchestration created in the style of Sir Arthur. It was revived by the late Bill Venman and the Valley Light Opera in 1991. So, with that, Professor Strong.
Cast member here.
That's
Good heavens.
There's a podium if you want it.
Well, I'll try this for starters. Some of you may be familiar with Thespis as a text, and there have been probably more settings of Thespis as a libretto than any opera since the Baroque operas that Meniscalco wrote a million libretti for, because the original score was lost, and who could resist trying to bring it back to life? It was their first opera. They were 29, Sullivan, and Gilbert 35. It was a Christmas extravaganza for the season in 1871, and who knew what to expect? Sullivan had already written Cox and Box and the Contrabandista. Gilbert had a number of straight plays, as well as, in fact, quite a lot, dozens indeed, and the Bad Ballads. But this was the first time the two eventually famous folks got together. In the style of the times, it was produced at the Gaiety Theater as a kind of a seasonal extravaganza. It wasn't expected to be published. The libretto, of course, was. And the libretto that we have is not perfect. It's missing probably things that were changed during the run. Apparently there was a song for Nicemus that disappeared. It's not a libretto. But it's as good as you can get. It is Gilbert. It's been in print ever since 1870. Well, whenever they first collected his plays. That was actually, it was after he died that they added it in the final 4th volume, without his chance to correct it. So that's what we have. What we also have, though, is the surprising thing that the famous chorus, Climbing Over Rocky Mountain, started in Thespis. It was the scene in which the Thespians, the acting troupe, mounts Mount Olympus, climbing over Rocky Mountain. There are no mountains in Cornwall. But and instead of the lasses, it's the lads and lasses, and instead of the bright seashore, it's the mountaintop. There are a few other adjustments. But in putting together Pirates at the last minute in New York, whether they decided earlier to use it or whether they last minute decided, they took a hold of Climbing Over Rocky Mountain from Thespis. So that exists in the sense that we know the lyrics are virtually the same. I had the chance to look at the Pierpont Morgan Library in New York, the manuscript of the Pirates. And indeed, Sullivan has simply inserted the Thespis score, crossed out the tenor and bass parts, and changed a few words, but only for the first third or so of the number. So it may well be that he recomposed the rest of it for Pirates in a different style. We don't know, but we can stick to the Pirate score. And because I copied down the four-part harmonies, we were able to use Sullivan's four-part harmonies. The other chunk that was discovered only about 30 years ago is the original ballet music, at least part of it. Numbers 1, 3, and 5 were discovered in a score of Sullivan's Diamond Jubilee ballet Victoria and Mary England, and it was in the same hand as the Thespis copyists from the same hand, so it was identified as probably from the same, and there was ballet music in Thespis. So we knew at least 3 numbers, and you can conjecture what the other 2 and 4 might be. But there's one surviving original, and that is Little Maid of Arcady, the song which the leading man, so to speak, Spartan, sings. In the original, he was played by a she, but as you know, Gilbert later went against the cross-dressing, and so we've assigned it to a gentleman. So here's the score as it was published back then, as a parlor song after the original production. And there's Scott. And when they turn something from a somewhat racy opera into a parlor song for nice Victorian ladies, you have to change a few things, like when Cousin Robin jilts the girl, the little maid, instead of saying, weary of his lover's play, it goes, fickle as the month of May. He jilted her and went away, which is what Sullivan said, and what Gilbert originally said, but ran away. Somehow I guess that's better. But the music is, at least in piano score, all there. So that survives. Anyway, many people have tried to set this libretto to music. And Frank Miller, who was the first cellist of Toscanini's NBC Orchestra, wrote his own score back in the 30s or 40s, I'm not sure exactly. That's one approach, write a new score, and that's great, but it's Gilbert and somebody, not Gilbert and Sullivan. Another approach, which was done by the Fulham Light Opera Company after Terence Rees brought out a somewhat edited and conjectured version of the libretto based on reports. That approach, which was Roderick Spencer and Maximilian Miranda, how do you say Miranda? Took the music of Sullivan's lesser-known works, and I hate to say it's pretty slow. And it's not a very bouncy piece, at least in the performance. But that's another approach, to take lesser-known Sullivan music and fit it to the word. The final approach that other people have done, and I'm not alone in this, is to find Sullivan music of a more familiar sort. There's been a recent one in England that's caught on a lot, which uses a lot of Sullivan music, rewriting it a good deal, but also throws in a little bit of Offenbach, which I think is cheating. Anyway, my approach, which you will hear about today, was to take 2 numbers from each of the eventual full-length Gilbert and Sullivan operas, 1 from Parliament by Jury and 2 from the others, and find ways of setting it to the libretto. How did this all start? Well, when I was a child, at the high school in my neighborhood did a Gilbert and Sullivan every year, and I became, as probably many of you did, intrigued and obsessed and addicted and all that. So I was from Patience when I was 6 on, and it just kept happening. And we had a modern library edition of the libretto, and I, as a kid, maybe in 4th, 5th grade, was trying to read them all. And I noted that Thespis began with a very funny dialogue between the aging Diana and the aging Apollo. And I remember my sister and me, when we were probably in late elementary school, putting on a puppet show for our parents with Diana and Apollo. That's where it started. And therefore, a lifelong, I'm now 75, so yeah, 65 years of Thespis in my life. I tried to do something with it in high school, and in those days it was only Thermofax. You may remember Thermofax before Xerox was around. But I did find ways of taking bits from those other scores and figuring out. For instance, in Pirates, Is There Not One Maiden Breast seemed to fit, for a while at least, to Here Far Away From All the World in Thespis. It went off track and it didn't work too well, but I kept trying to find fits. And eventually, after many other forays into Gilbert Sullivan, such as the Grand Duke production, which I'm still very pleased to have done, I kept working on it. So, what came up finally was this production, which John Breslin here, conductor and orchestrator and amazing technician of the keyboard computer, I don't know how you did it. We have an actual, printed score, the whole shebang. And as well as, most recently, a orchestra score with orchestra parts, which can be extracted, and it's a labor of love, a labor of God knows how much, how many hours, but we hope it's worth it. So, what we're going to talk about today is sort of how this whole thing worked. I was going to just pass out a sheet, one for each, there's more than we need, of the lyrics that we're going to show excerpts from, videos of. And I'll sort of show you how the process went. As you all know, Gilbert is an amazingly inventive rhythmic poet. He seldom repeats the same rhythms, all these ingenious twists and turns. So it's not like you can just find, oh, I'll fit this to that. There are really three things you have to figure out when you're trying to get a new setting. One, obviously, the rhythm. Two, the appropriateness of the feel of the music. What doesn't express the right, you wouldn't put a patter song to a love song, for instance. And then the third is the voice parts. You want to have it be within the range of who might be actually singing parts, or if it's an ensemble, that's something that would accommodate all the actors. So it was a long and tedious process, and if you notice on this quintet, the first piece on the left, this is at the moment when the gods, the Olympian gods, having felt themselves a little out of it on Earth, are horrified to see a troupe of people, it turns out to be Thespis' acting troupe, ascending the mountain for a picnic. And Mercury, who is, by the way, still in our version played by a female soprano, because in the original, that was the only way women could show leg on the Victorian stage, as if they were dressed as boys. Tights, of course, but nonetheless. So Mercury is played by a girl to this day. It's a great pattern part for a girl. They don't really have pattern parts. So Mercury enters and announces that these people are coming up the mountain. What are we going to do? So, John, have you got the video clip? Okay. So what you'll see is, and I'll just warn you, each of the little brackets I put around the text shows a change of source. Although actually the first one runs right into the second, but you'll recognize a recitative and a quintet. And then it moves into three other operas and back again, so we'll talk about it after you've heard it once and see what it sounds like. This, by the way, is from the second production, the one that was done in Northampton at the Academy of Music by the Valley Light Opera, conducted by Bill Benman, who, alas, is no longer here, but he's probably the only man on earth who's conducted all of Sullivan's light opera scores, including The Beauty Stone and The Emerald Isle and all sorts of things. He was the second to produce this work, and John and I went through some revisions before it happened, and this is the revised.
Now, the tab score in front of it is on page 24.
Yeah.
Speak quickly, for you get a warning. myself so much exertion.
Oh, government survey, God make assertion.
Perhaps the hour I love their diversion.
They seem to read all my heart looks expression.
Goodness gracious, how audacious, earth is spacious, why come here? How indeed they're proceeding, would the greeting that is clear. Goodness gracious, why come here? Mighty Jove, to value your existence, send them a thunderbolt with your regards. My thunderbolts, the valid at a distance, are not effective at 100 yards.
Oh, great my heart, like a flower, like a flower, lunatics to marry a star. Why are you lunatics? I want the world, I know my love, I don't propose to the fire.
The rains are happily arising, only as anyone knows and does. Goodness gracious, how audacious, earth is spacious, why come here? What goes wrong, the man must fall, we must welcome here, goodness gracious, welcome here. Goodness gracious, how audacious, goodness gracious, welcome here. Our repeating and proceeding, what is reading that is there. I hardly can believe it's true. In one wrist, wine in dozens true. Hardly can believe it's true. Gracious, why come here?
So you probably picked up the sources. Anybody want to run it through for us? We start with the recitative in the gondoliers, Bless My Heart, Consider My Position, and then the Private Life on Quintet. But then it moves into G minor and the Pirates with You Told Me You Were Fair as Gold, and then back to Recitative in the Yeoman, The River Must Be Dragged, back to Gondoliers, and then of course Mikado, Patriotic Fervor, and back to Gondoliers. So it was a tricky business to put it together. My first attempt, back when Lori was in the first version, was just setting it to Rapture, Rapture from Yeoman. But
When I read that, that's what I was.
yeah, sure. Yeah. But that was, it didn't account for the sort of emotional and rhythmic changes in the various parts of the, so this becomes more of a dramatic, operatic moment with, changes of feeling. I was very proud of that one. And the finale to the first act actually runs through, let's see, it starts with Utopia, goes to Patience, Princess Ida, Mikado, then it uses the galop from the ballet music, and then it goes back to Pirates, and finally ends in Patience again, in that big stretch. So that happens both in both finales and a few other moments where I've dovetailed a lot of things. More simply, and to my mind somewhat remarkably, the next two ones that we're going to look at, the patter song that Thespis, the manager of the theater company, sings, is an example of one of Gilbert's fable stories, sort of like a bad ballad. I can only think of a few other examples, but The Magnet and the Churn and Patience is one, where a character tells a story with a moral to it, to teach the character something. And this is all about how you shouldn't hobnob with your inferiors, because Thespis, being the leader of the troupe, doesn't like the idea of what do I under him. And of course, when the gods come along and say, "What are you doing here?" he says, "Don't know you, don't know you," which causes them to rage. So this is a very complicated, long patter song, 5 verses long with a chorus. And to my surprise, taking a cue from the little fall diddle little lay at the refrain, I remembered in the Grand Duke, where the Baroness enters claiming Ludwig as her husband, "Do you know who I am? I don't. Your countenance I can't fix, my dear." Ends with the refrain of all the little LA. It also has a very chuggy kind of railroad rhythm, and this is a story about a railroad man. And with a little bit of dickering, and of course a lot of note adjusting, adding more syllables, for instance, to a single note, it fit pretty well, not just verbally, but the feeling of the whole thing. It's sort of a machine music, early machine music, because the reports from the newspapers at the time said that what happened in this moment was the chorus starts imitating railroad sounds. 1871, stomping and whistling and making chug noises. And so we've tried to add that to our performance. Anyway, this is an example from, in fact, the original production with Stephen Carrillo, who was a wonderful Thespis. He was sort of, Thespis has to be a bit of a jerk. I mean, he's a pompous ass who thinks he's the best thing in the world. And it's interesting, Thespis, the first of their collaborations, is mirrored by the Grand Duke, the last. Each is about a theater troupe taking over Olympus in the first one and the Grand Duchy in the second. So it's sort of a full circle kind of thing. You've been in Grand Duke, it looks like you nodded. No, you just noticed that. So listen to the patter song from...
That's on page 60 if you want.
Here it is. I once knew a chap who discharged a function on the north, south, east, west, Middlesex Junction. He was conspicuous, exceeding for his affable ways and his easy breeding. Although a chairman of directors, he was hand in glove with the ticket inspectors. He tipped the guards with brand new fibers and sang little songs to the engine drivers. Oh, little, oh, little, oh, oh, little, oh, little, cars told to him with great compunction by one who had discharged the function. A chairman of directors responsible for the north, south, east, west, Middlesex Junction. Each Christmas Day he gave each stoker a silver shovel and a golden poker. He buttonhole flowers for the ticket sorters and rich bath buns for the outside porters. He'd mount his blocks on first-class hunters, and he built little villas for the roadside shutters. And if any were fond of pigeon shooting, he'd ask them down to his place at Tooting. Was told to be with great compassion by one who had discharged with caution. A chairman of directors on the north, south, east, west, Middlesex Junction. In course of time there spread a rumor that he did all this from a sense of humor. So instead of signaling and stoking, they gave themselves up to a course of joking. Whenever they knew that he was riding, they shunted his train on a lonely siding, or stopped all night in the middle of a tunnel on the plea that the boiler was a-coming through the funnel. Was told to be the great compassion by one who had discharged the function. A chairman of directors function on the north, south, east, west, Middlesex Junction. If he wished to go to turn for Sterling, his train through several counties whirling would set him down in a fit of larking at 4 a.m. in the wilds of barking. This pleased his whim and seemed to strike it, but the general public didn't like it. The receipts fell after a few repeatings, and he got it hot at the annual meetings. Was told to be with great compassion by one who had discharged the function. A chairman of directors function on the north, south, east, west, Middlesex Junction. He followed out his whim with vigor. The shares fell down to a nominal figure. These are the sad results proceeding from his affable ways and his easy breeding. The line with its rails and guards and pillars was sold for a song to marine store dealers. The shareholders are all in the workers, and he sells pipe lights in the region circus.
I don't want to make a claim that it can't be proven, but there are several places where I feel like maybe this was stolen by Sullivan from Thespis's and brought to the Grand Duke, and there are a couple others like that. Who knows? There's no way of knowing. We do know that he did ask for the score, the parts back from the Gaiety Theater, I guess, at some point when he was writing Patience. So if he'd rated the vocal score, the orchestra score, for the full score for Clarets, he may have rated more when he got to Patience, and who knows if he continued that, because the score itself existed, as far as we know, in some form at Chapel Music Publishers until a fire in the 60s, is that right?
And that was probably a vocal score, not...
Probably just a vocal, but at least something may have existed, and people should have and could have and might have found it.
And it was something they weren't supposed to have, which is why they never told anybody.
They had secreted it away, I see.
Well,
Well, it's gone, as far as we know. Isaac Asimov, the science fiction writer, wrote a short story about time travel. Someone went back to the first night of Thespis to hear it, which is a fun story. I forget what it's called. Anyway, that song from the Grand Duke seemed to work pretty well. And Lloyd Schwartz, who was the music critic for the Boston Phoenix at the time, said, funny that the big hit of the show was from the Grand Duke, the least known of the operas, coming back. So on the other side of the page is another example where I think not only does the music fit, but the situation fits. If you think of Patience with, if Sapphira chooses to marry, you're Diana, I'm Apollo, it's about who's going to marry who. The rhythms work, the feeling works, the situation works, and the only thing I did to mess it up a little bit was when Thespis gives his verdict about who's going to marry who, I moved back to a similar situation in the Gondoliers in a contemplated fashion when they're all deciding who's going to marry who, 3/5 or something. The situation, and the opera is interesting. The two main parts, the big ones that make the opera work, are Thespis and Mercury. They carry the weight of the drama, and because Mercury is sort of the raison d'etre in the company. Mercury stays on Olympus to keep track of his actors who are making a mess of things. And so Mercury has two big patter songs, and Thespis, being the dominant figure, is a major role. The others are the love interests, along with, of course, the gods and the Tipsy and other such. And each of the great thing about the chorus of actors is each one's very distinct, and they have their own particular shtick, you might say. Preposterous and Stupidess were played by a famous a burlesque duo, who sort of like we might think of Three Stooges or something, a kind of a well-known team. Just as Mercury was played by Nellie McFerrin, who was a famous burlesque performer. She with her legs. So this gave a lot of options for various people. Sullivan's own brother, Fred, played Apollo. Anyway, so here we have the situation of the young lovers who are supposedly on their wedding picnic, Sparkeon and Nicemus. You can read those as Sparky and Nice Girl. They are squabbling because in having become Olympians, they discovered that if Nicemus, if he plays Apollo, he's not supposed to marry, well, you'll find out in the lyrics. And whose brother, whose wife, whose whatever. It's a little racy. Anyway, this is the situation where Daphne, the soubrette, is claiming that she gets to marry Apollo, and Thespis has to work it all.
The question is, who are we all? And what is our relation to each other?
You're Diana, I'm Apollo, and Calliope, see.
He's your brother, more and more, and he has really married me.
By the rules of this response, she's his wife and you are not.
By this golden wedding ring, I'm his wife and you're a thief.
By this golden wedding ring, she's his wife and Josephine. Please will someone kindly tell us who are our respective kin? All of us are very jealous, neither of them will give in. Please will someone kindly tell enough, I swear.
I'm his wife and you're her brother.
If we go by lamprey hair, over saddles I will bear, doing this all through lamprey air. Over saddles I will bear, doing this all through the verdict. Asparkeia is Apollo, up in this Olympian clime. Why, Nicemus it will follow. He's her husband for the time. When Sparkeian turns to mortal, join once more the sons of men. He may take you to his portal. He will be your husband then.
When Sparkeion turns to mortal, joins once more the sons of men. He may take you to his portal. He will be your husband then.
I may take her to my portal, I will be her husband then. That is my decision, according to my mental vision. Put an end to all collision. That is my decision. My decision, my decision. That is my decision. I will take her to his portal, I will be your
So, the mention of Lempriere's classical dictionary struck a chord with me when I was looking at the drafts for Utopia Limited libretto, which were published by John Wilson not that long ago. There's mention of a Lempriere story about Cupid, which I've not been able to track down. I asked the classics department at Tufts if this fable was for real, but they'd never heard of it. Anyway, I thought, and they said that Nicemus had a song in the opera, and the second act is rather empty, the libretto is missing, it moves, it's too much dialogue and not enough insertion. So there are three moments when Sparkeion does get a song, a little bit of harmony, but the two women don't. So I took the words from the Utopia score with the permission of the theatrical blah blah blah, something in London that owns it, and set it to additional music from Sorcerer and Grand Duke. And then there's a lyric from which appears a year later in 1872 in Happy Arcadia, another one of Gilbert's non-Sullivan pieces, which I set to Sullivan music, in which a character named Daphne sings about how she's just not the way she was at 17. And it sort of perfectly fits our Daphne, that's the one right here. And so I found music in the Victorian Mary England ballet, which Sullivan obviously was rewriting it for other things, or interpolating things from, and fit that. So the second act has two new numbers that I could stick in without a single change of dialogue. They just work flawlessly into it. So that's my addition to the score. But now I'm going to give it over to John, who will talk about Little Maid of Arcady and everyone sing it, but mostly talk about his own very arduous process of doing all this. I owe it all to him. This would never have happened without. So,
Thank you, Professor Strong. Now, our next speaker, Dr. John Breslin, has been music director of the Connecticut Gilbert and Sullivan Society for 27 seasons. During that time, he has conducted most of the Gilbert and Sullivan canon multiple times. He has participated in over 100 productions across Connecticut and the eastern U.S. as a music director, conductor, accompanist, or actor in various genres of musical theater, from opera to Broadway musicals. He has received 9 Eugene O'Neill Awards for Excellence in Community Theater, a Lifetime Achievement Award from Connecticut Gilbert and Sullivan Society, and he's also recognized as a scholar and lecturer on Gilbert and Sullivan. Dr. Breslin holds an honorary membership of the Opera Comique, in Portsmouth, England. He has been the organist at the Union Baptist Church in Mystic, Connecticut for the last 26 years. And he holds a Bachelor of Science degree from Wagner College and a Doctor of Dental Medicine degree from Tufts University. And he's retired from Waterford Dental Associates in 2011 and now considers himself a musician by profession who resides in Stonington, Connecticut. Dr. Dressman.
I don't know if you noticed that in the quintet that we're showing you, there's a lyric about it seems more like a cook's excursion. You know what happened to them this week, right? Yeah, they went bust and all sorts of people were stranded overseas. So
Thespis is now, once again, needs a footnote. No cooks are anymore.
no more cook's excursions to Olympus. And also, Jonathan was talking about the lyrics that were crossed out in Climbing Over Rocky Mountain. There's one that didn't get crossed out that they should have. It's where the stream's swollen by the summer rain, and when does Pirates take place, right?
February 29th.
February. So why the stream is swollen with the summer rain, right? So that's one that he neglected to change. It should have been changed. Well, I'm really pleased and honored to be invited to be a presenter among such a distinguished company today. I don't do it off the cuff like Jonathan does as well. As some of you are aware, Act 2 of Thespis opens with the chorus of thespians intoning, "Of all symposia, the best by half upon Olympus here awaits us." While preparing our glossary for the Gilbert Sullivan Society's program for our upcoming production, I happened to notice this definition of symposia in Harry Benford's Gilbert Sullivan lexicon. And the definition, according to him, is drinking parties. Well, I'm not sure if that really describes the event, but I guess time will tell. My involvement with Thespis dates back to 1987 when I attended one of the monthly meetings of our Connecticut Society. We used to have monthly meetings back then with various speakers. At the time, I had been involved with the Society for about 5 years, first as accompanist and then as music director. The guest speaker for the evening was Professor Jonathan Strong from Tufts University, and I hope he won't mind me referring to him as Jonathan for the rest of this talk. And he was giving a program on Sullivan's music apart from Gilbert, complete with recorded excerpts from many pieces that I was totally unfamiliar with, such as selections from his ballets, oratorios, and the opera Ivanhoe. It must be remembered that back then, many of these pieces had yet to be commercially recorded, so this was pretty much uncharted territory. After the formal talk and Q&A session had ended, Jonathan was introduced to me by our then artistic director, Bob Cumming. It seems that they had been in discussion about bringing to fruition a project that Jonathan had been working on for many years, a recreation of Thespis using music entirely from Sullivan sources, namely the 13 extant operas. Jonathan had developed a rough piano vocal score, mainly published piano accompaniments with existing lyrics blocked out and replaced by handwritten Thespis lyrics. This is it. This is the original score that we got from Jonathan and we worked from, and you can see his writing is in there in place of the regular lyrics, and then let's see if I can find the little page. It might have some of the dialogue. You see how the dialogue was pasted in too.
This was luckily in the Xerox after.
And this was actually the score that we worked from. Here's the page that has the dialogue too. So there's the dialogue. Had to have good eyes back then. So I'm going to leave these up here later if you want to take a look at them. Even had a little overture attached. Bob and Jonathan asked me if I would be interested in refining the piece and creating the necessary orchestra score and parts. And somewhat full-heartedly, I agreed. not really comprehending the enormity of the task that would lie ahead. Most of the music that would be included had the readily available scoring used in the operas. However, there were several instances where scoring was not available to me. These included the excerpts from the ballets, L'Île Enchantée and Victoria and Mary England. Jonathan was able to supply me with recordings of these selections which I could use to pattern my orchestrations on. I decided that for orchestral forces, I would use the common early Savoy arrangement of pairs of flutes, with the second doubling on piccolo, 2 clarinets, 2 trumpets, substituting for cornets, 2 horns, 2 trombones, a single oboe, single bassoon, percussion and strings. Now the later Savoy operas, beginning with Yeoman of the Guard, added a 3rd trombone and a 2nd bassoon. And the Victoria score also included a harp and extra percussion. So these scores had to be edited down. There were several selections that were transposed to new keys from the original. Also, there were instances where the orchestration would prove too heavy for the new adaptation. For example, there's a section in the first act finale that uses music from Princess Ida that normally serves as Hildebrand's solo, "Now hearken to my strict command, on every hand," which is then followed by a chorus response with full brass and woodwind accompaniment. However, since this is a solo throughout in our Thespis, I decided to drop the brass parts there in this section so we didn't overrun the solo line. The one selection that no recording or orchestration existed for was Little Maid of Arcady, which as you saw, Sullivan published as a separate song with piano accompaniment. Jonathan brought it with him. So this I scored entirely from scratch in the manner of most Sullivan song accompaniments, relying mainly on strings with woodwind highlights and doublings where appropriate. So here's the result. Here's my orchestration of Little Maid of Arcady. Hit the lights again, and I'll play that one.
I'll sing it to you. Little Maid of Arcady sat on Cousin Robin's knee, hot in form and face and limb, nobody could rival him. He was brave and she was fair, truth they made a pretty pair. Happy little maid in the sea, happy maid of Arcady. Happy little maid in the sea, happy maid of Arcady. Happy maid of Arcady. Moments fled as moments will, happily enough, until after, say, a month or two, Robin did as Robins do, weary of his lover's play, gentleman went away. Wretched little maid she, wretched maid of Arcady, wretched maid of Arcady. To her little home she crept, there she sat her down and wept. Maiden wept as maidens will, grew so thin and pale until Cousin Richard came to woo. Then again the roses grew. Happy little maiden she, happy maid of Arcady. Happy little maiden she, happy maid of Arcady. Happy maid of Arcady.
I might just note that Cousin Robin and Cousin Richard sort of appear in Runagore a little bit later. And the line that I forgot to mention was in the Bowdlerized version, instead of saying that Cousin Richard came to, then another came to keep it from being two in the family.
So that was the result of my orchestration. And with all due respect to Jonathan, I was not satisfied with the pasted-up overture that he had provided.
Not a composer.
And suggested I substitute a new one for him. So he gave me permission with the caveat that I only use themes from the two genuine Thespis pieces, Climbing Over Rocky Mountain and Little Maid of Arcady, plus a little interpolation of some passages from the Pirates of Penzance overture. Also, there were some instances where better modulations were needed in key change passages. But on the whole, I did not tamper with Jonathan's work. Of course, this was all done in the days before computer technology, so everything had to be done by hand. Fortunately, my music handwriting is pretty legible, probably a lot more so than my ordinary handwriting, which was once described to me by one of my grade school teachers as resembling a chicken walking through ink. I have brought with me a reproduction of the handwritten orchestra score, which ran to about 190 pages. The original was in pencil, as well as one of the hand-copied orchestra parts. So this was, for example, the handwritten orchestra score.
190 pages of that, imagine.
This is copied off, and then the parts that the players played from, as I said, I have not too bad. Let's see, number 3. So it's pretty legible. This is the viola part. So once again, so that was my handwritten efforts there. So the cast in the original 1989 production worked from the manual I showed you earlier. At last, on October 20th, 1989, the Jonathan Strong recreation of Thespis premiered at the Wallace Stevens Theater in Hartford, Connecticut, with Bob Cumming directing and me conducting. A professional videographer filmed the event with hopes of selling it commercially. All the orchestra members had to sign a release allowing this. Actually, every now and then you can find a copy in a VHS section of a library. A few years ago, I contacted the videographer, and he made me a DVD copy for me. And that's a lot of things that we were watching right there came from that. Meanwhile, Bill Venman, who had also been interested in this version, had decided to tackle it with the Valley Light Opera for their 1991 spring production. There were 2 numbers in the first act that Jonathan was not satisfied with in the Hartford version, namely the opening chorus of Stars Throughout the Night and the Gods Quintet, O Incident Unprecedented. The first had originally been set to the Gavotte from Gondoliers, the other to the duet Rapture, Rapture from Yeomen of the Guard. The Star Chorus was reset to the Berceuse from Victoria and Mary England ballet. And I believe Jonathan, in his talk, covered the history of the resetting of the quintet, so he explained that to us earlier. Also, at this opportune moment, Roderick Spencer and Selwyn Tillett correctly identified music that was mixed in with the score of the ballet Lear l'Enchanté as actually being part of the ballet music from Thespis. We obtained a photocopy of the score and included it as an entr'acte in the 1991 production, although it is unsure just where in the original staging this music fit in. And once again, I brought with me what the photocopies of the material from the Pierpoint Library look like that we worked from. So this is basically the Sullivan score, whoever copied it out from him. So I'll leave this up here if you can look at it later. So this is what I copied out the parts from the ballet from. As far as we know, the 1991 Valley Light Opera performance was the first time that this music had been heard. in the original context since the 1871 Gaiety Theater production. So it laid vacant there for quite a long time. Subsequently, there was a commercial recording made, which also they took a guess of what the two missing movements should have been, and they included those.
And in fact, one of them we actually guessed at and used as a marks of the Olympians. So,
Correct. Yes, that's right.
Psychic.
About 5 years after the VLO production, I moved into a new house, bought a computer, and installed both Microsoft Word and Finale music notation program on it. It was now possible for me to produce a printed piano vocal score of about 210 pages. Wasn't an easy job, and it took some time to develop the necessary skills to accomplish it. Especially tricky was entering the lyrics in the first Thespis solo, I Once Knew a Chap, which you just heard, and the indications for train sounds that Jonathan had suggested. Also, I did not have my computer hooked up to an electronic musical keyboard, so everything had to be entered through a regular computer keyboard. But as time went on, I became pretty adept at it. And the finished copy greatly resembles the ones I brought with me today. I've actually handed out quite a few of them, so that's what the printed copy looks like now. We're into our third edition. Some of you have the third edition, some of you have an earlier one. Last autumn, the Connecticut Guild of Song Society's Board of Directors voted to revive the Jonathan Strong Thespis in honor of the 30th anniversary of its premiere. Even at this point, some minor improvements in the score had to be done, so we came out with our third edition. Also, because of the changes, new orchestra parts had to be developed. I decided to make it my winter project to develop a printed score using the Finale program and to use this score to also generate neatly printed orchestral parts. As always, this presented a whole host of challenges to be overcome, and with a few calls to the Finale help desk, but it seems to come out well, and the new printed score goes to 382 pages, so I'm sure what that looks like, and also, so this is the newly printed score on Finale, which is, as you see, it is a little bit more readable than the one that I handed, but and I also have I showed you the handwritten viola part. I have the printed viola part with me also. I'll just grab that real quick. So this is how the printed orchestra parts look now. So they're very neat. As I say, we've got a full set now of nicely printed parts. I can't wait to see when we do our first orchestra rehearsal how many mistakes I made. Because I found a few mistakes from our printed score. John and I are ready to put out our fourth edition now. Because during rehearsal I found things, I thought we had it almost perfect. I found about 20 or 25 more things that needed corrections. Now, one change I did make in the parts was to convert all the trumpet parts to B-flat trumpets. I don't know how many of you went to transposing instruments and such. But Sullivan would routinely switch back and forth between A clarinets and trumpets and B-flat clarinets and trumpets, depending on the key of the selection. This was actually to help with the fingering in keys with multiple flats and sharps, as A instruments reduce the number of sharps in the concert key signature by 3. In other words, for example, in the key of B with a concert key signature of 5 sharps, when you play it on an A clarinet, then they just have to read 2 sharps because it becomes the key of D. B-flat instruments, on the other hand, reduce the number of flats in a key signature by 2. Now, this isn't a problem for clarinetists who usually either switch barrels on a single instrument or have 2 instruments at hand, and they can do it pretty fast. However, modern pit trumpeters usually only have 1 B-flat instrument with them, and so must transpose in their head a half step in order to play the sections written for A trumpet. Or as I see so often in the rented or borrowed parts, they mark up the parts and write in their own transposition saying what the note should be. Jonathan and I had thought we pretty much weeded out all the imperfections and errors in the score when we came out for our third edition. But the rehearsal process for CTGSS has turned up some inaccuracies that we hadn't discovered. So I've made up new pages to correct these, and I hope now we're going to put out our fourth edition, which will be even more correct. I think we've just about got them all now. So that brings us up to the present time. We're now almost done with the rehearsal process for our production in Middletown, Connecticut, which will take place on Saturday, October 12th and Sunday, October 13th. The show has really grown on me and the cast. It is definitely Gilbertian in humor, and Jonathan's choice of music selections hold up very well. The paradox is that the less one is familiar with the operas, the easier it is to adapt to performing. The more veteran players have basically had to unlearn the lyrics and vocal parts that they're used to and relearn the new settings. We have to reprogram them, basically. Sort of think Pineapple Paul but with lyrics, right? So I sometimes feel like we are on the frontier of New England and our northern friends find it intimidating to go south of Massachusetts. But I do hope some of you might venture on down to see the performance for curiosity's sake, if nothing else. And who knows, you might find it interesting enough to produce it for your own groups, especially now that all the material is readily available and neatly printed. And Jonathan and I would be glad to help you in any way possible. One little side effect, note, if 10 want to go down, we offer a discount for groups of 10. And they don't even all have to go on the same day. So if you find 10 people who want to buy tickets and put it in one order, you get a 10% discount, and don't have to all travel down together, but you know, you can split it up. So maybe you guys want to come up with some sort of plan, and we'll be glad to help you. But I do hope some of you will make it down. It really is a fun score, and it is Gilbert Sullivan for sure. Yes.
Do you have a website or a phone number that you can order to?
Well, I actually handed out a bunch of these, so you got all the information you need. So, I don't know if we want to, I got a question here. Yes.
I actually came to this from the other direction. I started singing GNS in the late 80s. So this was one of my first shows.
And you had to deprogram
I had to switch back. I had to learn that the words in the Mikado were not the words. And when I came across the Grand Duke, I said, "Oh my God, what is this stupid song?" You know me, I don't do it. That's Middlesex Junction. What is that? So I had the opposite unlearning issue. It was fun.
Yes.
We actually had a similar experience. My wife and I played Pineapple Paul when we were in college. We had really learned the rest of the canon. So as we would come across, oh, this is from Pineapple Paul.
I love it was from Pineapple Paul.
We
See how quick I could identify. What's that? What's that?
It was easy. They were all from Pineapple Paul.
Well, if you come to this, you come with that same mindset, you know, that, oh yeah, I know where that really is from.
Yes.
But actually, the score holds together remarkably well. It really does. We're having a lot of fun with it, and it is worth a listen. It is worth seeing. So, any other questions for me? Okay, thank you.
Once again, we want to thank you for coming out to the Symposium on Thespis. We have one speaker left this afternoon, Dr. J. Donald Smith, who is a longtime member of the New England GNS Society. He served as its president for 9 years. He's a member of the Sudbury, Mass. Savoyards, either performing, ushering, or working backstage. He's been a regular at the International GNS Festival and been with the Savoy Net Performing Group for each of their productions at the festival. Since his retirement as professor of chemistry and biochemistry at UMass Dartmouth, His research has focused on various unexplored facets of the history of Gilbert and Sullivan and their relationships, resulting in such articles published in the Sir Arthur Sullivan Society magazine and the W.S. Gilbert Society Journal as Who Was Basil Hood?, Thespis in America, The Production Which Never Happened, The Hidden History of His Excellency, and The Missing Songs of the Mountebanks. He was also the major motivating force behind the recent professional recording of the Mountebanks, for which he also provided the liner notes. And as you all know, I just want to remind you that the Connecticut Gilbert and Sullivan Society is presenting the Jonathan Strong version of Thespis on October 12 and 13 at the Middletown High School in Middletown, Connecticut. And you can get more information on their website, which has a plethora of information. So, Dr. Smith.
Thank you. I thought just a couple of general references for any discussion of Thespis. These are the two essential sources. The Terence Rees book, originally published in 1964, a modestly revised second edition in 2003, still available from the Sullivan Society as well as ABE Books. And then Tillett and Spencer, who discovered the ballet music for Thespis, did a very thorough summary of everything that had happened since Terence Rees published his book and presented their own version of Thespis at the Sir Arthur Sullivan Society Festival in autumn 2002, and this is just the first page of their article. Some of the Sullivan Society magazines are now being put up online. I don't know whether they've gotten as far as this one yet. So a two-part talk, only the first part of which is advertised, is basically about Thespis in America. If I have time to get to the second part, I'll talk more about some of the music that was alluded to earlier, but with a few more different takes on it. And Thespis in America, the observations come from the libretto of Thespis, the original libretto of Thespis, which had this inscription on it: "Caution to American pirates, the copyright of the dialogue and music of this piece for the United States and Canada has been assigned to Mr. Field of the Boston Museum by agreement dated 7th December 1871. That is 2.5 weeks before the first production. My interest started with looking at that, and it turns out that all of the Boston Museum correspondence is in Harvard. And so there are a lot of letters from Gilbert's agent, Edward English, as well as a few from Gilbert himself, to R. Montgomery Field, who was the manager of the Boston Museum. Reginald Allen, in his introduction to Thespis in the first act, Gilbert and Sullivan, refers to these letters, some of them. He made the classic mistake of hiring somebody else to do his research. He asked the librarian at the Theater Collection at Harvard to send him copies of any letter that mentioned the Gilbert and Sullivan work. There are a number of letters that only mention Pygmalion and Galatea, Gilbert's play, which was premiered just about the week before Thespis. And some of these letters intersperse and provide additional information about Thespis, even though it's not mentioned in the letters. Allen never had those. And so putting them together, we come out with this story. The Boston Museum was one of the main theaters of Boston at the time and had done a number of Gilbert plays. So that a lot of the correspondence predates Thespis and talks about, from English to Field, talking about Palace of Truth and upcoming Great Expectations, Gilbert's adaptation of Dickens. Now, This is the first mention of the letter, October 30th, where Gilbert talked about written, rehearsed, and prepared in 3 to 5 weeks. This is 2 months, so it was a lot longer gestation than people have given it credit for. But what is particularly noted that this work is going to happen, and he said, I will send you, as soon as I get it, the piece, the music, sketches of scenery, idea of dresses, in right good time before its production in London. And so the question always is, what did English send to Field? By the end of October, actually this is a couple of days earlier, Sullivan is writing to his brother Fred, talking about Thespis. He said, Thespis will do very well if it is not written up being all Toole. J.L. Toole, who originally played Thespis, was the big star of the time, and so Sullivan's saying, as long as it's not all about him, it could do very well. It's undated, but there's the rest of the letter that hits the year, and of course we know what his mother's birthday was November 2nd, so we picked Friday before. By the beginning of December, Sullivan, who's out of town, is sending a letter to his mother saying, I hope you sent the music to Lutz yesterday. Meyer Lutz was the conductor of the Gaiety Theater. 3 weeks before the production, the music was done.
That doesn't sound like Sullivan at all.
Well, it was different. Probably just at least the vocal lines for rehearsal purposes, not necessarily the full score. Now, you remember the notice in the libretto said December 7th. This is English's letter to Field on December 7th. Also about the joint piece of Sullivan and Gilbert. Will you have necessary stamp put to assignment and charge, same in next account to Mr. Gilbert? In other words, far from Gilbert being confused about which play or opera he was authorizing, here's this letter from Field saying, take out the copyright. So when Gilbert put that date into the libretto, he assumed that it was going to be done. Also, as a postscript to that letter, here's Field saying, if you decide to do it, Gilbert will come over and stage it for you with no charge except for a first-class return ticket on Cunard. December 12th, we'll send you the manuscript of Sullivan and Gilbert piece as soon as I get it. So Sullivan had the lyrics so he could work on the music. Gilbert is still working on putting the whole thing together. December 28th, I send you the assignment of the piece by Gilbert and Sullivan. It's called here at the Gaiety Thespis. It's the first and only time the title of the piece is mentioned. I've been expecting the manuscript from Mr. Gilbert's promise for some days past. As soon as I get it, I will forward it to you. Procrastination. January 7th, the Boston Museum program has the stamp and the notice of assignment of copyright for Pygmalion and Galatea. If the one for Thespis ever appeared, it's not in any program I could find. The trouble is most of the sources of these old programs usually just have the cover page and they've torn out all the ads, so you don't see the subsequent pages. What is interesting is that Field never took out the copyright for Pygmalion and Galatea either. I mean, there's a publication from the Library of Congress of dramatic works that are copyrighted starting from 1870 through 1918, which is when these two volumes appeared. Neither Pygmalion nor Galatea nor Thespis is listed. Most of the other GNS works are. This is sort of the key letter for me, February 8th. There was no music to send you for Pygmalion. The Boston Museum had a stock company of actors and actresses, very well established. And while they had an orchestra, as did every theater at the time, they didn't do operas or musicals or whatever. The orchestra would do overtures, entr'actes, occasional songs that were in plays, but they never did full musical pieces. So from my point of view, what English was doing was barking up the wrong tree. It was the wrong theater. Because plenty of other theaters in Boston had orchestras that did do opera. Eventually, the Boston Museum would start having touring companies come through. The Emily Saldine Company came through in 1875 with Season of Offenbach and Trial by Jury. And then by the time the Boston Museum, which did the first Pinafore production in November of 1878, it was pretty much the end of the stock company. And they would do a lot more music then, but it was a whole new company of people. By May 3rd, again, one of the last letters, the Boston Museum actually never produced Pygmalion Galatea either. This is related to Gilbert buying back the copyright, or the rights for it, and it was produced at another theater later on in Boston. So whatever, if anything, was English ever sent to Field, there's no trace of it. I mean, it's in that Boston Museum collection at Harvard, or 37 letters, about a dozen of which relate to Gilbert and Sullivan. But in fact, Field was a theatrical agent, he wasn't a musical agent. And if you look at the list of his other clients and performers, they were pretty much straight actors. So it was never produced in the US, it was the wrong theater. Whether the right theater would have done it, who knows? Now the second part, which sort of dovetails on what we've already heard, is what exactly are we looking for and where? We know there are at least 3 sources of the music. Whether there was an original autograph full score, we don't know. There has never been a trace of it. And because Sullivan was working fast, it may have been scraps that the copyist used to create the orchestra parts, the vocal parts, and so on. And so we have the copyist, or we know of the copyist full score, because that's the bit that's in the Pirates of Penzance, and that's the bit that's in the ballet music. The copyist, by the way, was George Baird, who was his copyist for a very long time, and then George Baird's son took over. The, quote, vocal or rehearsal score was the one that was supposedly destroyed in the Chapel's fire. They weren't supposed to have it. What Chapel's had was stuff that they were renting out. Things like the cello concerto, the full parts for the Martyr of Antioch. But they weren't supposed to have any of the originals, which should have gone to Sullivan's estate after he died. And we know about the orchestra parts. At the time of Pinafore, because of the lawsuit with the Comedy Opera Company, Sullivan is writing to John Hollingshead, manager of the Gaiety Theatre. This is in 1879. Sullivan is in Paris for one of his many kidney operations. If you will give them to Michael Gunn anytime tomorrow before the evening, he will hold them for me. Michael Gunn, soon after this, with his brother, moved to Dublin to manage the Gaiety Theatre there. And I wonder if anybody ever looked in the archives of the Gaiety Theatre in Dublin to see whether Michael Gunn might have still had them, because there's no other record of them after this. Whether Sullivan, who could be absent-minded at times, actually got them back from him. So there's one thing. The second thing is that this is 1872, Sullivan writing to Gilbert, asking him how much he wanted for the words for Little Maid of Arcady. So there was never any plan to publish a vocal score, because he wouldn't have been asking about just one song. And then invited him over to have dinner one evening. There is a manuscript of Little Maid of Arcady in the Morgan Library. It's up on their website, as a matter of fact. This is not the one that was used by the publisher to create the song, because you can always tell that because it's marked up. The publishers would have publishers' markings on it, and pinholes in the corners where the typesetter would have hung it up so they could read it. This is in June 2nd of 1872. Sullivan was giving it to Miss May Banks. He also gave her a second manuscript for her birthday. She was the original soloist in Sullivan's The Tempest in 1862. She was somewhat older than Sullivan because she starts appearing in the London ads about 1855, but clearly there was some kind of involvement between Sullivan and her. And this one does show some of the changes that Jonathan referred to, but not all of them. Okay, we mentioned the vocal score. This is what we know. And the question is, did Sullivan only have Climbing Over Rocky Mountain with him in New York, or did he have the whole score? Clearly, particularly if you've read Mark Shepard's very own recently on Thespis, which I was going through this week, Climbing Over Rocky Mountain was not a last-minute substitution. It was planned from the beginning for pirates. That's why Sullivan had it with him. The question is, did he have just that, or did he have a whole score? We know the ballet music was reused in Victoria and Mary England. And there was a letter from Sullivan to Bendel requesting the ballet music full score, not in my hand. This is Sullivan in Switzerland in 1897. Now, at that time, had Sullivan cut the music from the ballet and left it on his desk, or had it previously been cut out? I will argue, and I'll present some evidence for it, the ballet music was cut from the score at the time of the original production, because if you look at the original reviews, sometimes it was in the second act at various different places. It was even one time in the first act. And so it may have been cut from the score at that time, from the convenience of the conductor, so he could insert it wherever it was going to be performed that night. And then finally, there was another cut in 1873, the duet for Sparky on the Niceness. So even by the time of Pirates, Sullivan has already been cutting the score up. And we know that because we have a letter from Sullivan to Rummel. Joseph Rummel was a music arranger, Viennese, who is well known for reducing large orchestral pieces, and particularly operas, for piano two hands or piano four hands. And it's a fragment of a letter, unfortunately. It's chopped up. The original's in the Morgan Library. Thespis is not published, but if you like, I will send you the full score of the duet in question. Let me have a line on a postcard. There's only one duet in Thespis, so that has to be it. And this is the one duet that is mentioned in every single review as one of the highlights of the show. Are you still good to fulfill your promise of arranging The Merchant of Venice? I shall like it printed immediately and delighted to have your name associated with mine in the matter. The Merchant of Venice, or piano four hands, was published in 1873. Rummel died in 1874. Obviously, this letter came from his estate. Whatever happened to that music, whether he sent it back, it was certainly never arranged by him. And after 2 world wars, God knows what's available in Vienna anymore. Now, in thinking about the ballet music, we have to think about the Gaiety Theater. The Gaiety had a ballet company. Everything that was done there had to incorporate a ballet, because a lot of their patrons were the gentlemen about town who would come to take care of the ballet girls, so to speak. So that always had to be the ballet. And this is the first night Thespis program, which is in the Morgan. Ballet at 11. The ballet had to happen at a certain time. That's when the young men about town would be finished their evening, come in to see the ballerinas and take them off afterwards. So the ballet was going to be at 11. And so that's why it moved around during the show. And this is just that clip from the book on the Gaiety talking about the ballet as an essential part of the Gaiety entertainment. The other thing that happened with Thespis, as Jonathan alluded to, is that there are a lot of characters there. This is the first night program. Venus has credit. And again, she's mentioned in the reviews all the way through the production, but there's no lines. Every other TGNS opera, a character who has one line has a credit in the program. Isabel in Pirates, or Ruth in Ruddigore. One line, but they got a credit in the program. Here's somebody with a credit in the program with no lines. So the libretto is incomplete. And so the question then is, we know Sullivan had something of Thespis with him in New York. For all intents and purposes, I would assume he probably had most of the score there. If you read the Tillett and Spencer article, their reconstruction, and from my point of view, it's really the only reconstruction, everything else is a realization. Because they basically took the view that essentially the first act of Pirates is all Thespis. And I heard their production, and it fits far better than anything else. One clue is in a letter from Sullivan to his mother from Baltimore, January 8th. Pirates is open. He's conducted it. They made the changes. He's changing hotels. In the meantime, part of the time he was in New York, he stayed with his friends, the Grants. I have left my lodgings as the landlady was always drunk and offensive, and I've left all my things at the Grants. If he had the Thespis music with him, could he have left it with the Grants and then somehow given it to them, or gotten lost? Well, unfortunately, every place Sullivan lived or stayed in New York has been long since demolished. I was able to track down descendants of the Grant family, who are now all English. They did not even know about the family connection with Sullivan. And I've met several of them several times. And they certainly have no music or anything like that. But unfortunately, that was a dead end. Just to give a little bit of hope, I found some original Pirates material in a most unlikely place. When I was working on the mountebanks, I went out to Wisconsin, one of the two major places where the archives of Thames Whitmore Company reside. The other place is Library of Congress. There are a couple of subsidiary ones. And what I discovered, along with the mountebank stuff, there's an original Pirate score there. Conductor's score, bearing the stamp of H.C. Husted. Now, this is not a full score. It's either a rehearsal or it's a conductor's score. It's the vocal lines with the bridges between verses or intros or whatever. So this is just a sample of leading into the opening chorus. And there's a libretto there also. The final version again, stamped with the name of H.C. Husted. Who was H.C. Husted? He was the touring manager for the original D'Oyly Card Opera Company after it left New York. Went to Boston and various other places in New England. So this came from his collection. And you find something, you never know what may turn up somewhere at some time. So Sullivan did leave the score in the U.S. So far, there's no trace of it. Gilbert is a little bit more enigmatic. Jonathan mentioned that we don't know what the full libretto was like because Gilbert never published, except for the original one. There are 4 states of it. The text is identical, it just changes the ads during the original run of Thespis. It was only part of volume 4 of his collected plays, the proofs of which were on his desk the day he died. He never published it before that. It wasn't unique, there were some of his other early plays that didn't get put in until the last edition. But starting with Patience, the joint works are listed, except for Thespis. Thespis only appears with the Mikado. Why? 1893, Gilbert's contract for Utopia and for the touring productions. The type manuscript is from D'Oyly Carte, and this is the contract for Gilbert to sign. D'Oyly Carte shall have the sole right of performance of librettos of such operas in Great Britain and Ireland, etc., etc. Joint authorship of W.S. Gilbert and Arthur Sullivan, and here's Gilbert's handwritten edition, except Thespis. He was still holding on to it. And the whole basis of the Tillett and Spencer argument is that they wanted to have people forget that Climbing Over Rocky Mountain and possibly other music had come from a previous opera for pirates. Now, with all due respect to Jonathan's reconstruction and many of the others, in browsing through the British Library's Historic Newspapers website, I came across this one, which is the first time I've seen this one quoted. 1875, so a review of Trial by Jury. Somebody remembered Thespis enough to say, Mr. Arthur Sullivan's comic songs are close imitations of those which he has already written in Thespis, the Contrabandista, and Cox and Box. In other words, if you're going to the Gondoliers or the Grand Duke or Utopia for a reconstruction, Sullivan is so different by that time. Yes, they work and they fit, but that's not what Thespis sounded like. I will give you Patience. I will give you Patience, but I think between Patience and Iolanthe, Sullivan changes very substantially in terms of the sophistication, particularly of his orchestrations.
You're right, I quite agree.
And so there we are. It's still an enigma, and you never know. So,
Have you looked in Dublin? You said
I've never been to Ireland. I mean, there are things in the Gaiety Theatre archives that are in the National Library of Dublin, and the National Library of Ireland. That's certainly not listed there. But of course, you have all the troubles in 1922 with a lot of fires and so on. So whether there's anything else there or not, who knows? I mean, and there are horrible stories, and I mean horror stories, of London theaters where some new owner buys a theater and they just junk everything that's sitting in the basement.
I think the drunk landlady has it.
Well, that's probably, well, that building is, there is a plaque on that building, but it's not the same building. As far as I can tell, it's a much more modern.
A building at that location.
And the building at that location on East 20th Street in Manhattan. So you don't know. I mean, I've heard the Tillett and Spencer version, and I think they were right. They were the first ones who suggested that a lot of the gods going down to earth in the Act 1 finale was Offenbach, because it fits the bit from Orpheus in the Underworld, the end of Act 2, where the gods go down to hell to see what's going on. And it fits. And because the Gaiety was not the most sophisticated group of singers, and because they were performing at least something else most of the time, and Toole was on tour and didn't get back to London until 3 days before the performance, and every opening night review said, terribly under-rehearsed. And so, by giving them a little bit of Offenbach where they at least knew the music, I think there's a logic for that.
Would Sullivan accept that?
I think that Sullivan did it. I think Sullivan was probably the one who did it. But Gilbert was probably using the same rhythm, knowing the Offenbach. I mean, you always had this story that Gilbert couldn't sing, and he claimed he didn't know any music, but he obviously had a very good sense of rhythm. And there's a story told by Gilbert, for whatever it's worth, that Sullivan always told him, if you have some music in mind which caused this, don't tell him, because he didn't want to be influenced by it. Except one case, Sullivan asked him for what he had in mind when he composed it, and that was, I have a song to sing. And, you know, everything else. And if you look at Sullivan's writings and his biography of Arthur Lawrence, which was done while Sullivan was alive, he talks about the process of composition, and he says the first thing he always does is work out the rhythm. And he gives, for one song, about 15 different rhythms that he could have used. And so that's how he worked. You know, why they didn't want to publish it originally, who knows? I think it was certainly crude, and it was a kind of work that they didn't want to be remembered for, in terms of the cross-dressing and whatever. But it's certainly not true, as some people said, that after Thespis they went their separate ways. They were in touch. They were certainly in touch.
Any other questions for our panelists?
Stan?
Yeah, I always have thought Bendel had some involvement when Sullivan died, that there was material left over, maybe from Thespis, maybe not from Thespis,
Yeah.
that he went through, he distributed, at least I believe he distributed the scores or the...
No, the scores were distributed in Sullivan's will.
No, but where were they physically when he died?
Sullivan probably would have had.
I agree. And where was Bendel then?
Bendel did not live. I guess I don't remember if Bendel actually lived with. No, he didn't, because he had a separate family. He was a secretary.
But he was not just a copyist or an arranger. He was very close to Sullivan and had, I don't know if control is the right word to use, but had access at least to Sullivan's material, I think.
Yes and no. In Sullivan's will, at least in one section of it, in terms of distribution of personal effects, he specifically directs that his executors to consult with Mrs. Ronalds because she knows what his intentions were. And she had the right to pick any scores that she wanted that were not already distributed in his will. And I wondered what she took. I mean, there are a few published scores that are in the Morgan that obviously Sullivan gave to her. But what she took, I don't know, and there are no living descendants as far as I can tell. And again, because some of her descendants lived in Paris, and you know, she died in the middle of the First
Did his will say anything about Bendel?
Yeah, he got a couple of scores, but he's not really mentioned in that. I mean, he gets a bequest, but that's it. Yeah. But no, his executors would have been responsible for distributing things. But clearly, you know, Chappell's or any Kramer, one of the other things that had rental rights would have had that material there, which is why a lot of that stuff was lost in the Chappell's fire.
One last question unrelated to that. When you went to Wisconsin, what did you learn from that pirate score that was unexpected or different?
Quite honestly, I've not gone through it in detail. I mean, I've learned when I go somewhere, I just photograph as much as I can. I've got, you know, 30 years worth of material to work out if I live that long.
So this is your archives. Have you?
I have a copy of it, yeah.
Have you shown that to somebody else that would?
Yeah, well, Mark has got a copy of it, so that when he's working on Pirates, which he is now for the very arm, he's got those used in.
For the text.
Both the text and the score. I mean, I looked at it, and it's late enough that all the changes have been made.
Okay.
So, yeah.
I like your distinction between a realization and a reconstruction, and I think that's quite right. What we did really was a realization. We got the text, how can we make it sound like a Gilbert's own opera? and therefore the later operas fit just as much.
Yeah.
But a reconstruction is an attempt to guess at what might really have once been there.
Yeah.
And that it's a different approach. So I guess just as the totally new composed scores,
Yeah.
I think they're all valid in their own
Oh,
ways.
of course.
But my theory was I want a kaleidoscope of the whole Savoy
Sure.
canon in one place to have fun with, you know,
Yeah.
to recognize the tunes or be baffled by the
I mean,
auto settings, whatever it turns out to be.
I mean, if you haven't heard or read that Tilden Spencer article, the railway song is set to modern major general,
Yeah.
and it works.
It might work,
There's a copy of that in the Gilbert and Sullivan archives online, so
Oh, that article?
you can read that article
Yeah.
online.
Okay, yeah. Yeah, thank you.
Well, hope people can come see our realization. No, Don will realize it. But, yeah, the great thing is that the libretto stands up in all these different settings,
Yeah.
which is a tribute to Gilbert. I mean, the thing makes a lot of fun on the stage, no matter what the music is.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I mean, I was in the Baker and Henty version, the Savoynet did at the festival a few years ago, which basically derives from the Tilden Spencer version, although they made some changes, which I didn't agree with. And I asked them about it, they said, yes, but if we did those, then it would be the Tilden Spencer version, not our own.
Yeah.
I mean, for example, Oh, Is There Not One Maiden Breast fits the duet like a glove.
Except for the refrain.
Yeah, except for a little bit at the end, but,
No, it makes sense.
and it's the right mood for it.
And I used it when I was in high school,
Yeah.
in my first attempt. And then I moved to Utopia Limited instead.
Before we adjourn, Dr. Dress has got a little surprise for us.
Grab your music, we're going to sing along of the known pieces I have. Anyone need a copy? So we'll start with Little Man of Arcady. There it is, page 134. Everybody in unison, here we go.
Little maid of Arcady, sat across the robin's knee. All her friends and foes had been, nobody could ride away. He was great as she was fair, the fair maid of pretty fair. That little maid shade, lucky maid of Arcady.
Okay, now, the next one, we need some soloists. I need 2 female volunteers, I need 2 men volunteers.
What's the song?
What ladies are going to volunteer?
I'm a costumer.
Got any lady volunteers?
What are we doing?
Climbing over Rocky Mountain, I'm sure.
Well, if we have lady volunteers or men who want a six-ball setup. The two lady solos are Tritea on page 48 and Daphne on page 49. Then we need a couple of men. One to do Timidon. Well, you did Timidon.
No, I gave us tips.
Oh, you were Timidon, yeah, all right. We need a Timidon. You want me Timidon?
Sure.
Okay, on page 51, and we need a Silimon on page 52. Any volunteers for Silimon? You know the music, it's climbing over. Okay, good, we got one. Now, here's where you've got to pay attention, because there are going to be some lyrics that you're not used to there. You know, climbing over, so watch out for them. Till the mountaintop, till the mountaintop they gain and all this sort of thing. So keep your eye on the lyrics, and not what we think they are.